The idea that Nazi Germany could have won the Second World War is uncomfortable, but history is not a moral storybook. It is a system of decisions, resources, timing, and limits. Germany did not lose because defeat was inevitable from the start. It lost because a series of choices collided with economic reality, geography, and ideology. To understand how Germany could have actually won, we must examine where the war was still flexible, where outcomes were undecided, and where different decisions could have shifted the balance before the structure of total war hardened beyond reversal. In the opening phase of the war, Germany possessed genuine advantages. Its military doctrine emphasized speed, coordination, and initiative at a time when most European armies were still preparing for a slow, defensive conflict. The campaigns in Poland, Norway, the Low Countries, and France were not miracles. They were the result of concentrated force, operational daring, and enemies who misjudged the nature of modern war. By mid-1940, Germany controlled the industrial heart of continental Europe. Its enemies were either defeated, neutralized, or isolated. At this moment, the war was not lost. In fact, it was closer to being won than at any later point. The first critical decision point was Britain. Germany's greatest mistake was not failing to invade Britain, but failing to define a coherent strategy toward it. Britain was not defeated militarily in 1940, but it was vulnerable. Its army had lost most of its heavy equipment in France. Its economy depended on overseas trade. Its empire was overstretched. Germany had options: a sustained campaign against shipping, a focused air war aimed at ports and infrastructure rather than cities, and diplomatic pressure that exploited Britain's isolation. Instead, Germany drifted between strategies, allowing Britain time to recover, reorganize, and eventually become the platform for Allied return to Europe. At the same time, Germany failed to understand the nature of maritime war. It built an army for continental conquest, but neglected the long-term requirements of naval and air supremacy over the oceans. The U-boat campaign came close to strangling Britain, but it was never fully prioritized or protected. Resources were divided. Technological advantages were not exploited consistently. Had Germany committed earlier and more decisively to a war on Britain's supply lines, the outcome in the Atlantic might have forced Britain to negotiate, removing Germany's most resilient enemy before the global balance shifted. The most consequential decision of all was the invasion of the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa was not just a military gamble, it was an ideological one. Germany did not prepare for a conventional war of attrition, it prepared for annihilation. This decision poisoned strategy from the beginning. Instead of focusing on achievable military objectives, Germany pursued racial and political goals that consumed resources, provoked resistance, and ensured that the war in the East would be total and unforgiving. Millions of potential laborers and collaborators were turned into enemies. Logistics collapsed under the weight of brutality. Yet even here, defeat was not immediate. In 1941, the Red Army was disorganized, poorly led, and reeling from surprise. German forces advanced hundreds of kilometers. Moscow was threatened. The Soviet state survived not because victory was guaranteed, but because Germany failed to prioritize. It split its forces, diverted resources towards ideological targets, and underestimated the capacity of the Soviet Union to absorb losses and relocate industry. A narrower campaign focused on decisive economic and political centers, combined with a different occupation policy, might have produced a very different outcome. Logistics was the silent battlefield where Germany ultimately lost. Blitzkrieg worked only as long as supply lines remained short and manageable. Once the war expanded across continents, Germany's industrial base and transport network proved insufficient. Rail gauges changed, roads deteriorated, fuel shortages became chronic. Germany did not lose because her soldiers were inferior, but because her system could not sustain prolonged high-intensity war against industrial giants. A strategy that avoided overextension, delayed confrontation with the Soviet Union, and focused on consolidating gains could have preserved German strength while weakening her enemies. Oil was another decisive factor. Germany entered the war without secure access to sufficient fuel reserves. This was no secret. Every major campaign was shaped by the search for oil. The Balkans, North Africa, and the Caucasus were not side theaters. They were desperate attempts to solve a structural weakness. A Germany that avoided simultaneous wars and focused earlier on securing reliable energy sources might have extended its operational freedom long enough to force political settlements rather than total defeat. The entry of the United States transformed the war irreversibly. Before 1941, Germany faced powerful enemies, but not an unbeatable coalition. After Pearl Harbor and Germany's declaration of war on the United States, the conflict became global and industrial on a scale Germany could not match. This was not forced by necessity, it was a choice. Germany gained nothing from declaring war on the United States and accelerated its own strategic encirclement. Had Germany avoided this step, the war might have remained a regional conflict long enough for exhaustion and negotiation to shape its end. Ideology was the deepest flaw. Nazi racial doctrine was not an accessory to strategy, it overrode it. Entire populations were treated as expendable. Occupied economies were plundered rather than integrated. Scientific talent was driven out or murdered. Command decisions were distorted by loyalty tests rather than competence. A Germany that behaved like a traditional great power rather than a revolutionary racial state would have had access to more manpower, more resources, and more strategic flexibility. The paradox is that for Germany to win, it would have needed to become something it was not. It would have needed restraint instead of radicalism, pragmatism instead of ideology, consolidation instead of endless expansion. Victory was not impossible in a narrow sense, but it was incompatible with the core beliefs of the regime. The same ideology that fueled early aggression ensured long-term failure. If Germany had made different choices early enough, the war could have ended not with total victory, but with a negotiated settlement that left Germany dominant in Europe. Such an outcome would not require defeating every enemy outright. It would have required preventing the formation of an overwhelming coalition. History shows that wars are often lost not on the battlefield, but at the level of grand strategy. Understanding how Germany could have won is not about admiration or regret. It is about recognizing how fragile history can be and how systems collapse when ambition outruns capacity. The Second World War was not decided by destiny, it was decided by decisions, and those decisions, taken together, made defeat unavoidable only after the moment of possibility had already passed.